The reception hall was prepared. The guests had arrived, and Catherine was moments away from stepping into one of the palace's most carefully arranged evenings. Then she saw the faces waiting beyond the entrance. They were not ordinary attendees. They were the figures she privately associated with Camilla's influence, and within seconds, the princess made a decision that stunned every person standing nearby. The reception would not go ahead. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine stopped so suddenly that William nearly stepped past her. The prince followed her stare and saw the figures beside the doorway, waiting as if no resistance was possible. She had personally approved the guests after weeks of tension, hoping to unite charitable partners, diplomats, senior royals, and trusted household members without the rivalries surrounding the king's court. The evening was meant to prove that her office could create unity on its own terms. Shock hardened into anger. Catherine had restricted attendance to prevent palace circles from turning the reception into a contest for influence. A royal household, meaning the staff and offices serving a senior family member, could shape power without a public announcement. Now several people closely tied to Camilla stood at the entrance carrying access clearances. William leaned closer and asked what she had seen. Her answer came instantly. "They were not invited by me." The music stopped. Instructions moved through the room as staff approached guests in place. Catherine rejected advice to delay the reception while the list was checked. A delay would leave the unwanted group waiting publicly, forcing her either to accept them or create a spectacle. She understood the trap. Their presence was pressure delivered before witnesses. William watched her anger settle into resolve as she canceled the reception before crossing the threshold. Inside, diplomats exchanged stunned looks. Charity leaders lowered their voices, and attendees realized there had been no illness, security warning, or scheduling failure. The humiliation was real, but so was her message. Catherine would not host an event altered behind her back. A household official produced the clearance record. The authorization came from an office directly connected to Camilla, yet the code beneath it carried delegated authority from somewhere higher. William read the line twice, then asked who had approved the change. The answer silenced the corridor because it pointed beyond the queen consort's friends and toward the authority of the king himself. The reception had been cancelled in less than a minute, but to understand why Catherine considered those faces a threat, the loyalties and personal wounds behind that doorway had to be exposed. This was never simply a dispute over a guest list. Behind Catherine's refusal stood years of guarded conversations, unspoken comparisons, and two very different visions of royal influence. One woman had built her authority through patience, public duty, and the future of the crown. The other had survived decades of rejection to reach the throne beside Charles. At the palace door, those histories suddenly collided, and neither side was willing to retreat. Catherine walked away from the closed entrance carrying more than anger. The reception had been designed to prove that she could lead a major palace occasion without another royal office changing its purpose at the final moment. Her carefully chosen guests represented charities, diplomatic relationships, and future work she intended to guide herself. Allowing Camilla's associates inside would have suggested that her authority could still be altered whenever stronger palace loyalties demanded it. William followed her into the adjoining room and watched her remove her gloves. She placed them carefully on a side table, one over the other, as though controlling that small movement was the only way to contain everything else. Entering that room would have meant accepting a decision made behind my back, she told him. The prince understood immediately. This was not about disliking individuals. It was about whether the future queen could be publicly overruled at her own event. Camilla received the news while seated with a longtime confidant. The queen consort, a title given to the reigning king's wife without making her the ruling monarch, did not react at first. She remained silent long enough for the woman beside her to become uncomfortable. Then she asked one question. Had Catherine personally seen the group at the door? When the answer came back yes, her expression changed. She knew the cancellation would be read as a rejection, not only of her friends, but of her influence. Her inner circle had protected her through years of hostility, public judgment, and suspicion inside the royal household. They were more than social companions. They were the people who had defended her when others believed she would never stand beside Charles as queen. That loyalty made them valuable to her, but dangerous to Catherine, because their presence often carried the unspoken message that Camilla's wishes remained stronger than any written guest list. William soon learned that two of the unexpected attendees had previously questioned Catherine's growing control over future palace initiatives. A private briefing, recorded in a confidential household account, revealed something even more troubling. The group had expected to be welcomed publicly. They believed she would never risk canceling an entire evening just to keep them outside. That assumption unsettled the future king more than the clearances themselves. It meant the intervention had relied on Catherine choosing silence to avoid embarrassment. Yet she had done the opposite. The figures at the doorway had triggered the cancellation, but the true point of no return had come days earlier, during a private ceremony where one unexpected instruction shattered Catherine's trust. 7 days before the reception, Catherine entered a small palace ceremony, expecting little more than formal greetings and a brief exchange with charitable representatives. Instead, she watched one of her decisions publicly reversed before she could respond. The words were polite, the smiles remained fixed. Yet everyone present understood what had happened. Her authority had been challenged in a room where silence would be mistaken for surrender, and Camilla's closest allies were watching every second. Catherine had spent months shaping the event around a joint royal patronage initiative, a shared charitable project supported by more than one senior royal. Her office had chosen the speakers, approved the message, and placed a young medical advocate at the center, because his story represented renewal, service, and the future. That choice mattered. It showed that her growing role would not simply repeat old palace habits. The tension arrived moments before the principal address. One of Camilla's senior confidants entered, crossed directly to the master of ceremonies, and handed him a revised program. The program, a formal schedule listing the order of speakers and events, now named a longtime associate of the Queen Consort, in place of Catherine's chosen advocate. No discussion followed. The change was presented as settled. Catherine felt the insult immediately, but she refused to react before the guests. She turned toward Camilla, waiting for some sign that the decision had been made in error. The Queen Consort gave only a calm nod. That small gesture carried a brutal message. The replacement would stand, and challenging it publicly would make the princess appear disruptive. The ceremony continued, but the damage had already been done. Catherine watched months of careful preparation reduced to a display of someone else's influence. Her chosen speaker sat in silence while the replacement delivered the address. Success filled the room, yet beneath it sat humiliation. Everyone applauded. She did too. Catherine confronted Camilla privately once the guests had left. She asked why her office had not been consulted. The Queen Consort replied that palace unity sometimes required experienced hands. The phrase sounded measured, but to the princess, it was a judgment on her competence, and a warning that old loyalties could still overrule her. A courtier later disclosed the truth through a documented household account. The program had been altered before Camilla arrived. This was not a sudden correction. It was planned. When Catherine compared the names tied to that intervention with those later added to the reception access list, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Catherine folded the revised program once, returned it to an aide, and said, "This must never happen again." Days later, when she canceled the reception, Camilla understood exactly what that decision meant. The earlier insult explained Catherine's refusal, but it could not prevent the confrontation now moving through the palace corridors toward her closed door. Camilla did not send a message. She did not summon an aide or request a carefully scheduled discussion. She walked directly toward Catherine's private sitting room, while the cancelled reception was still being dismantled. William stood beside his wife when the door opened, and for several seconds no one spoke. Then the Queen Consort asked one devastating question. "Did you cancel an entire royal evening because my friends were invited?" Catherine held her ground. Less than 20 minutes had passed since the doors closed, and guests were still leaving, while staff cleared untouched place settings from the hall. No senior courtiers had entered the room with them. A courtier is a palace official who serves the royal household, often helping manage formal duties and private disputes. Without those officials present, there was no polished language to soften what came next. Camilla accused her of turning a manageable guest list problem into a public rejection. She said the cancellation had embarrassed loyal guests, damaged the king's household, and made the entire family look divided. Her voice stayed controlled, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. She believed Catherine had chosen the most dramatic response possible, because she wanted the insult to be seen. Catherine answered without raising her voice. The humiliation, she said, had begun when her authority was overridden. The reception was hers to host. The guest list was hers to approve, and walking into that room would have made her a decoration at someone else's event. William watched her carefully. He knew that every word was tied to the earlier ceremony, where silence had already cost her once. Camilla pulled a chair away from the table but did not sit. Catherine remained standing. The Queen Consort warned that such defiance would carry consequences, and only then did the prince move between them. The gesture changed the room. This was no longer a private disagreement between two women. It had become a line drawn around the future of royal authority. Camilla finally admitted that she knew her associates had been added. She insisted the authorization had come through the king's office and was therefore legitimate. William asked whether Charles had personally approved the names. She paused. Then she said the clearance carried his authority. But she did not answer the question itself. That silence exposed everything. Catherine's anger settled into something colder. She said she would accept the monarch's decision when she heard it from him directly, not through stamped clearances carried by people she had never invited. The future king then demanded the authorization record, the official document showing who had approved the change and under whose power it had been issued. The confrontation ended without apology, but as William demanded the authorization file, the struggle shifted from wounded pride to the machinery of royal power. Royal power rarely announces itself with raised voices. More often, it appears as a signature, a coded instruction, or a line placed quietly beneath an official seal. That night, the future of the dispute rested on a single authorization sheet. Catherine believed it would prove that her reception had been deliberately infiltrated. Camilla believed it would confirm her right to act. Charles, however, was about to discover that his name had been used in a way he had never fully approved. Charles received the file in his private study and read the opening page twice. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the folder, and said nothing. Palace access changes could pass through delegated offices, meaning senior staff were allowed to use the sovereign's broad authority without seeking a fresh signature for every individual name. That system kept the household moving. It also created room for someone to act before the king understood the full consequence. William stood across from his father and waited. Camilla's private office held standing approval for selected guests at joint royal functions. But Catherine's reception had never begun as a shared event. It belonged to her office, her charities, and her growing public role. Changing that classification did more than open a door. It allowed another household to reach into her plans and claim equal control. The document revealed the method. A senior official had renamed the reception a shared household engagement, an official event treated as the responsibility of more than one royal office. That single phrase created the technical path for Camilla's associates to be added. Beneath it sat a delegated code from the king's office. Yet nowhere in the file was there proof that Charles had personally reviewed the revised guest list. The king felt the trap close around him. Defending his wife would mean ignoring that Catherine had been overridden. Challenging the change would expose how easily his authority had been used without his direct knowledge. Camilla's position mattered to him, but so did the stability of the future monarchy. Silence now threatened both. William broke the stillness. He told his father that this was no longer about social discomfort or wounded pride. If Catherine's independent events could be altered through administrative maneuvers, then her future role could be weakened without any open confrontation. The future king did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Charles picked up a pen and drew one firm line beneath the changed classification. Then he looked toward the private secretary and asked, "Who instructed you to write this?" The answer came through a recorded internal account. The official had acted after a private conversation with Camilla. No direct order had been written, but the meaning had been understood. The paperwork exposed how the reception had been altered, but the king's next decision would determine who paid the price when the palace doors opened the following morning. By sunrise, the reception hall had been restored, as though the evening had never existed. The flowers were removed, the tables cleared, and the official calendar quietly amended. But the people inside the palace could not erase what they had witnessed. Catherine had drawn a boundary. Camilla's authority had been questioned. Charles had discovered that his office had been used without his direct knowledge, and one loyal courtier was about to absorb the first consequence. Staff received strict instructions to describe the cancellation as an internal scheduling decision. Guests were sent carefully written apologies, but no reason was offered. That silence mattered, because the charities had arrived expecting support, while diplomats had believed the evening would show unity after weeks of tension. Instead, they left with unanswered questions and the unmistakable sense that something had broken behind palace doors. Charles acted before breakfast was finished. The senior official who had reclassified the reception was temporarily removed from guest access duties while a private review began. A private review is an internal investigation used to examine decisions without immediately making the details public. The move was limited, but its meaning was clear. The king would not allow his delegated authority to be used without consequence. Camilla learned of the removal while sitting alone. She set down her cup without drinking and stared at the message from her office. The queen consort understood that the courtier had acted to protect her position. Yet he was now being sacrificed while Catherine's authority was strengthened. To her, Charles had chosen investigation over loyalty. That hurt more than the cancellation itself. Catherine felt no victory. She studied the list of disappointed charities and told William that innocent guests had paid for a conflict they did not create. The prince agreed, but reminded her that entering the reception would have created a precedent far harder to undo. She knew he was right. Still, the cost sat heavily between them. The review then uncovered something more troubling. A handwritten note in the official's briefing papers stated that Camilla wanted visible unity at the doorway. The phrase showed that the unexpected appearance had not been a harmless guest list error. It had been designed to force Catherine into a public display of acceptance. Charles responded with a new written order. No guest could be added to her future engagements without direct consent from her office. The decision protected Catherine, but it also confirmed that the palace had recognized the interference. Catherine signed personal apology letters one by one. She paused over the final envelope and said the reception must be held again, but under entirely different terms. Before those terms could be arranged, Camilla requested a private meeting with no advisors, documents, or witnesses. The first official consequence had fallen. Yet the real turning point would come only when the two women faced each other without offices, titles, or loyal circles between them. The second meeting was nothing like the first. There were no raised voices, no future kings standing between them, and no officials waiting outside with prepared language. Catherine and Camilla sat opposite one another in a small private room, each knowing the palace had already chosen sides in the public imagination. What followed was not an apology in the traditional sense. It was something rarer, an admission of fear from two women protecting very different futures. Camilla had requested the meeting herself. She agreed that no aides, secretaries, or family members would attend, removing every layer that normally protected royal conversations from honesty. Catherine accepted because she could not allow the cancelled reception to become a permanent symbol of division. The monarchy depended on public unity, but unity without respect had already proved dangerous. Camilla spoke first. She admitted that Catherine's growing influence frightened her, not because she doubted her ability, but because she could see the future taking shape around her. More staff were looking toward the next reign. More decisions were passing through William's household. She feared that once Charles' position weakened, the people who had defended her for years would be treated as unwanted remains of an older court. Catherine listened without interrupting. Then she answered with equal honesty. Every attempt to protect old loyalties by placing them inside her events without permission made cooperation harder, not safer. She said that trust could not survive if one woman's insecurity kept becoming another woman's public humiliation. Camilla reached into her handbag and removed a folded guest list. She placed it between them, picked up a pen, and drew a line through the names of her own associates. The gesture was quiet, but its meaning was unmistakable. The Queen Consort was withdrawing the people whose arrival had triggered the crisis. Her explanation followed through a recorded private account, prepared after the meeting. The plan, she said, had never been to seize Catherine's reception. It had been to make her circle appear permanently accepted before Charles' reign entered a more uncertain phase. She believed public inclusion would protect them later. Instead, it had exposed the fear behind the strategy. Catherine admitted that canceling the entire evening had been severe. Innocent guests had suffered, charities had been disappointed, and the palace had been embarrassed. But a quiet compromise would have turned the interference into precedent, meaning the same act could be repeated and defended as normal. Camilla finally agreed that Catherine would control the rescheduled reception completely. In return, the princess promised not to treat every person connected to her as an enemy. The personal battle had finally shifted, but outside those walls, headlines, broadcasters, and gathering crowds were preparing their own verdict. By midday, the cancelled reception was no longer a private royal dispute. It had become a national symbol of boundaries, loyalty, and the uncertain transfer of influence within the monarchy. Commentators debated whether Catherine had shown strength or recklessness. Camilla's supporters called the cancellation humiliating. Yet one image captured the public mood more powerfully than any palace statement. A line of people gathering outside Kensington Palace, with handwritten messages addressed to the future queen. Palace officials released a brief statement, confirming that the reception would be rescheduled. They refused to discuss the unauthorized changes to the guest arrangements, leaving the public to judge the silence for itself. That refusal mattered because charities had lost an important evening of support, while the royal family had lost control of the story. Some believed Catherine had protected the independence of her future role. Others argued that no palace rivalry should ever punish innocent guests. The morning newspapers turned the dispute into a national drama. One major front page carried the words, "Catherine closes the door," above an image of the darkened palace entrance where attendees had been turned away. Broadcasters repeated the phrase throughout the day, giving the cancellation a meaning larger than the reception itself. The doorway now represented a boundary the princess had refused to let others cross. Outside Kensington Palace, the public response became impossible to ignore. A woman stepped toward the gates and placed a handwritten card among the growing messages. It read, "A future queen must be allowed to lead." Those standing nearby applauded quietly, and the moment spread across television reports within minutes. The support was powerful, but it carried a warning. The public had begun choosing sides. Catherine watched the coverage and saw disappointed charity representatives describing what the lost reception had meant to their work. Their words affected her more deeply than the praise. She had defended her authority, yet success had come through other people's suffering. William remained close, reminding her that the rescheduled event now had to repair that damage. Camilla viewed the same broadcast from Clarence's house. She recognized that pressure had failed. The public no longer saw the dispute as a simple guest list disagreement. They saw it as a contest over whether Catherine would be permitted to lead. A palace broadcaster then revealed, through a documented briefing, that Charles had approved new written boundaries separating Catherine's engagements from the Queen Consort's guest authority. Soon afterward, the rescheduled invitation appeared with the princess named as the sole royal host. The world had chosen its symbols, and the palace had rewritten its rules, leaving one final act to determine whether the cancelled evening ended in permanent division or hard-won respect. When the palace doors opened again, Catherine did not hesitate at the entrance. The guest list carried her approval. The charities had returned, and no hidden authority waited to overturn her decision. Then Camilla arrived alone. None of the inner circle figures whose appearance had triggered the crisis stood beside her. For one suspended moment, the two women faced each other before the same doorway that had divided the palace, and Catherine extended her hand. Several weeks had passed since the cancellation, but no one inside the royal household had forgotten its cost. The reception had been rebuilt around its original charitable purpose, and every name had been personally approved through Catherine's office. Charles had also issued a new household instruction, a formal rule guiding how separate royal teams must work, requiring written consent before one senior office could add guests to another's independent engagement. Camilla paused before crossing the entrance. She had come without the advisors whose unexpected appearance had caused the crisis, and that absence said more than a public apology could have. The Queen Consort looked directly at Catherine and said, "This evening is yours." The princess held her gaze before replying, "Then let us make it matter." Catherine welcomed her inside, but the gesture was not surrender. She was showing that reconciliation became possible only after her boundaries had been recognized. Camilla accepted the new balance without another fight. By attending alone, she protected her dignity while quietly admitting that influence could no longer be forced through loyal intermediaries. William watched the exchange from across the room. The prince understood that his wife had achieved something greater than victory. She had defended her future authority without allowing bitterness to control what came next. The cancelled evening had hurt innocent guests, but the rescheduled reception now restored their work to the center of the story. Charles later spoke privately with both women. In a documented account of that conversation, the king admitted that his failure to define clear lines between their offices had allowed loyalty to harden into rivalry. He thanked Catherine for protecting her role, and Camilla for respecting the final agreement. The consequences were permanent. Informal influence could no longer override Catherine's decisions without direct accountability. Her cancellation had been severe, costly, and disruptive, yet it forced the palace to confront a conflict that silence had only deepened. Camilla lost the power to impose acceptance, but she retained her honor by stepping back willingly. The monarchy did not emerge untouched. It emerged corrected. The evening ended not with one woman defeating another, but with the crown accepting a lasting truth. Catherine would enter the future on her own authority, and no hidden circle would stand in her doorway again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.